Steve, a big issue during the campaign and during the session, and we've talked about it a little bit, was immigration. It's been a big issue around the country after Arizona passed their law. The governor said he wanted an Arizona-type law in this state. I think Senator Herodopoulos talked about the need for an immigration law, but in the end, an immigration law in Florida did not pass during the 2011 session. Let's talk about that in terms of the politics around immigration as an example of what was going on in the 2011 session.
Okay, well, you had several things at work. Number one, you have a cohesive and vocal group of Hispanic legislators from Miami-Dade who didn't like the way this thing was going. It seemed mean to them. It was anti-immigrant. You have important sectors of the business community, like the Florida Retail Federation, a fairly conservative organization that didn't like the signal we would be sending to tourists from Venezuela coming here wanting to spend their money at those outlet malls on I-75. You had J.D. Alexander, a respected senator who is very deep into agribusiness in his other life, who gave a very measured, nuanced speech on the Senate floor about how these people are striving, they've come here for a reason, they want to go back to their homeland. And he was rejecting this Tea Party, send them all back sort of mentality. And it was another example where you saw the moderating influence of the Florida Senate. These senators have big districts, very diverse districts, and the immigration issue just doesn't play as simplistically in the Senate as people might like.
Mary Ellen, any comments?
Well, I think that the part of the problem with the immigration legislation is that this was an issue that got an early vote in the House. The House took a really tough vote on it, and the Senate waited until the last minute. There was a lot of back and forth. There was a lot of inside House trading. You know, if you take this up, we'll do this for you. And that all got really bogged down in the end. The other thing that I found really remarkable about this session is that with the immigration bill and with the union issues, both pension and the union dues, we saw more public participation than any session I can remember. These people, the immigration, the pro-migrant community, didn't just come and march on the Capitol and then go home, which often happens. Instead, they came every week. They packed every meeting room. They prayed with legislators. They held signs. They carried banners. They brought their children. They showed that they were flesh and blood, hardworking people, who had a point of view, and they were in their face. And so I think, in some ways, I think they brought something that Tallahassee, because we're so far away, rarely sees, and that's real people.
I mean, remarkably well, that whole, you know, you talk about all the lobbying that goes on. That was a remarkable, I thought, the way they conducted themselves. Yes. You know, you couldn't help but feel it when they were wearing orange T-shirts, and every one of them said, "I am Florida." That's and right. I think J.D., Senator Alexander, had a rosary that somebody had given him the day he made one of the most remarkable speeches on the floor that I've seen in a long time. It was very emotional.
And he spoke about, gave him his rosary. He put it on his computer screen on the floor, and he kept it there the whole session.
It was remarkable, and I know he swayed votes on the floor that day. I thought it was a remarkable speech. Now, he has grown up working with immigrants and has hundreds of them in his business, and he knows the issues, and he was particularly opposed to the E-Verify issue.
Let me ask a hard-nosed question around all of this. Truly, I agree with you about the immigrants and their impact emotionally. But who had a greater impact, the immigrants or the agribusiness, tourism, and so forth, lobbyists and advocates?
The business community. I mean, the business community of the state that supports many of these Republican legislators, no question, killed this bill. I agree with Mary Ellen that it helped a lot that there was a face to go with it. And it was interesting to see on one day, I just made a mental note, I was looking at the 4th floor of the Capitol, which is usually where the lobbying corps lives during the session, and it's a pinstripe alley between the House and the Senate, you know, and it was taken over by immigrants in T-shirts to the point where there was no room for these people who are used to owning the fourth floor to stand around, and I thought that was a very interesting picture for me. But
well, think about the counter argument. If it weren't for the people with, you know, these real people, the argument for the business community is we want cheap labor, you know, and so I think this softens that argument in a remarkable way.
it's true, but it's also, Steve said something really important, and that is that it wasn't as simplistic as some of the campaign messages made this out to be. And that was, to me, the take-home message of the immigration debate, was that, 2010 was a simplistic year. The Tea Party and Rick Scott, I think, made it a year of slogans. And in fact, Rick Scott, when running for governor, one of his commercials said, it's really easy. And, kind of pointed back at the Capitol, like, these guys just don't get it. It's really simple to do this stuff. Well, he came up here and found out that it's not as black and white and as simple on many of these issues. That illegal immigration issue got heavily bogged down in questions about legal immigrants and tourists, as Steve said. Things that you might not think of when you're talking about, well, just throw all the illegals out. They're illegal after all. Well, there are all kinds of other things at play there that I think...
particularly for the election coming next year.
And
just think about that issue.
The tentacles go into so many places that I think a simplistic view just doesn't get it.
All right, let me move then to segue from your remark there to get the panel's assessment of Governor Scott's performance, if you will, in his first session. Brent, I'm going to throw that to you to begin discussion.
Well, I think we touched on it a little bit earlier, too, I think, with Mary Ellen's wrap-up piece in the Miami Herald. I think by his account, and by a lot of accounts, he certainly did, I think, as well as anyone did. He certainly has taken credit for some successes. Coming in cold as an outsider, what kind of a rapport he managed to build, if any, with lawmakers, I think I'm not so sure that we know, and probably has a lot of work to do in that area.
He set himself up with a very difficult task in that he had a dominant issue. And when you give yourself one goal, if you don't get that goal, you got a big problem.
That would be jobs?
And that would, well, yeah, it was a combination of, I guess it was really one and a half, jobs and tax cuts. He's going to come in here and cut taxes and put people back to work. Well, putting people back to work is a long-term issue. And if you really pressed Governor Scott about that, it was a long-term goal. He wanted to create 700,000 jobs over 7 years. But when you got to have something to show after that first session, and the unemployment rate is still pretty much the same, it's hard to take credit for a lot of that stuff. His other big goal was the immigration bill, which he didn't get. And the tax cut thing he's taking credit for, and it was a huge win in the eyes of the governor's office. They got a corporate tax income cut, but they didn't get anywhere near the income tax cut they wanted. They're going to raise the deduction. It's going to drop a lot of businesses off the rolls. But you're talking about, what we say the numbers were?
It's $1,100 max.
Yeah, so
for 15,000 businesses.
A tenth the size or less of the corporate income tax cut that Governor Scott wanted. So
he did get the weakening of the growth management laws, which he wanted. Mm-hmm. Yep. He got this requirement for the first time where state employees must contribute money to their own retirement plans. He only got a shadow of the corporate income tax cut he wanted. I think we all had the sense that he was not fully engaged. You've got to get in the faces of these legislators. I mean, the governor has to lobby too. It isn't just lobbyists who lobby. Mm-hmm. The governor has to basically grab these guys by the lapels and say, I've got to have this.
And the one time we saw him lobby was on the union dues bill, where he went to 4 senators who had privately been very clear they were going to vote against it. He went to their offices to try to persuade them, and he had zero luck. So he didn't call his shots or pick his shots that well either.
We've got about 2 minutes left. Almost every session, one issue, one bill kind of sums up or becomes the climax of the session. Steve, I'm going to let you start this.
Sure.
House Bill 5005. Okay, what was it about? Tell us a little bit about the drama about it, and I'd like everybody to comment on it. 2 minutes.
Very quickly. Okay, it was one of these so-called conforming bills that was basically a prearranged deal negotiated by a handful of legislators to deregulate interior designers. There are about 2,500 interior designers in the state, but they are a very cohesive group, and they testified against this idea in the House. This came out of the House. The Senate didn't like it. And when they put this bill on the Senate floor, supposedly to be rubber stamped by the body, the senators said no way, and they voted it down 32-6, a total repudiation of Mike Herodopoulos and the leadership team.
The 6 were the leaders. That the bill had not been aired in the Senate, and it was symbolic of a lot of things that were happening at the very end. And that was that there were bills. There were 44 of these so-called conforming bills. Much of the language had never been seen by members. It was a combination. Many of the bills that had gone through one chamber but not another were added on into these bills. And then they were basically told by leadership, we've agreed to this, and these are bills, conforming bills, you cannot amend. It's an up or down vote. And so the people who are elected to represent and have a vote of their own independent voice was cut short with these things, and I think there was a revolt in the end.
Steve's paper checked out the number of pages, 22,000 pages, 2,200 pages of 2,200 pages of conforming bills just sort of dropped on these people's desks at the end of the session. You know, coming a year after a former House Speaker almost went to prison for getting stuff secretly into the budget in the dead of night, you know, there was a lot of people who were very, very nervous about voting on stuff they didn't know what it was.
Brent, I'm going to have to
That's
stop
fine.
it there.
Wonderful finish. Just glad, we're all glad it's over, Steve.
Well, that's all the time we have. I appreciate you all being here with us, and we'll be back together again soon.